everyone, this is Eric Chopra from Ithasology. Welcome to another episode of History Book Reviews. Today the book that we are going to be reviewing is Yashaswini Chandra's The Tale of the Horse. It's a freshly released book. It's not something that I would generally read, but it was heavily recommended and I'm glad I got it. Yashaswini Chandra's book takes you through a very lucid account, a very comprehensive history of horses in India. But what I really appreciate about the book is that it does not look at horses from a very specific gaze. It's not about horses purely from a warfare, regal, royal sort of a gaze. It expands the scope. It links the history of horses with histories of art, mythology, folklore, culture, which makes this book very wide in scope and very interesting to read. Now again, as you might know, that the kind of books I read, the sort of history books that I choose to go for, I require them to be heavily cited. I wish for them to be very reliable, but also at the same time I look for accessibility. And that's one quality that I really appreciate in this book, that though it is very academically oriented, the writing style is such that it's very accessible to a common audience, that somebody who is not really invested in reading very academic books or books that are extremely cited can also go for this and have a very fun reading. There are sections in the book where she has described paintings. So one of the things that I did enjoy in this book is that a lot of times, even if there weren't paintings that she had, she was able to give us an entire description, a very vivid description, which helped us imagine how the painting would look like. So when she is discussing paintings from the Akbar or Jahangir era, she gives details of everything, be it the subtle details present in the painting to the larger symbolisms present in it. And the great thing is that she has consulted a number of academicians and scholars to make sure that her descriptions and her material is very accurate. So I'm pretty sure that for the sections on Mughal art, she has consulted Dr. Mehreen Chida Razvi, the art historian who deals with these areas. And that's something that I really appreciate. So in the work, Chandra explores various eras. She looks at the horses of the medieval and early medieval era in South India. She looks at the romance of the horse in Rajput states. She looks at horses under the empire. And it's very interesting because she's not looking at horses as a homogenized entity or in isolation. She's looking at them in terms of how societies and political relationships developed around them. So she's linking the history of horses with the history of mankind. So there are sections on how when horses, Arabian and Persian horses, would be shipped to South India through waterways, a lot of medieval South Indian kings would patronize even pirates as long as these people would give them horses from their loot. And there's also a section on how some Vijayanagara kings would even pay for perished horses as long as the tail was displayed as proof. So there are these very interesting bits that make you think about so many sections of the past that we do not usually think about. We also get to know of how during the colonial era there was this sort of colonization of horses too. How critical, and here Chandra says that the British were as critical of the Indian horse as they were of the Indian race, and there was this whole thing about thoroughbred horses overshadowing the Arabian and Persian horses of India. So it's also then very fascinating how the colonial gaze did not only look at Indians differently but also the animals of India. Now, Chandra has called this book an ode to horses, and rightfully so, because in a number of stories that she tells in the book, she helps the horse emerge as this central character. So one thing about the book is that it is a lot of sections are dedicated to the history of Rajasthan. This of course comes out of her love for Rajasthan too, as she mentions in her epilogue and acknowledgement section. And there's this particular story that I really liked. This is the retelling of the epic of Pabuji, the Rajasthani epic. And it's a very popular narrative. But of course, she helps us focus on the horses again. And then you are able to realize how the character of the horse, or how horses are able to capture popular imagination in these stories. So, you know, there are horses who are dying with the main characters. There are people reincarnating as horses. Different sort of names are given to different types of horses. And there's also a section on how when certain horses neighed and they hoofed, the earth and the heavens trembled. And you then can also imagine that when these stories are orally narrated, even till today, the dramatized retelling of these stories with the inclusion of horses in it would just make it so much more interesting. I've also already mentioned that Chandra gives us very vivid details of paintings and artworks, but these are not only done for aesthetic purposes. This is not only to show us how the horses how horses have been very visually appealing in artwork. She also talks about the various messages that these paintings might carry. So, what is the political or cultural or social significance of such works? So, what would a painting from the Deccan which portrays Chand Bibi riding a horse mean? What does an elite woman who rides a horse and this being portrayed in a painting mean? So there are these very fascinating sections which make you think about art history differently too. And of course, there is an inclusion of a lot of illustrations and a number of artworks, which makes this book very pleasurable to read. Now, I can keep going on and on about all the sections that I find very fascinating in this book, but I'd leave that to you. I don't want to give any more spoiler alerts, but I will say one thing, that this work is it's a very hopeful account. It makes you realize that there is so much out there that you can read about, write about, and make our understanding more nuanced on subjects that we would never even think of looking at. And it just makes you realize that if there's something that you find fascinating and you want to work on, then you can go ahead and do it. And you then also realize, this book is in certain ways an attempt to make us know that a history of horses is not an isolated retelling of an animal or a history of an animal that was manufactured at the margins of history. It is very much a part of our history because it is connected with how we have evolved over time. You read and you realize and you connect these dots and you think about the fact that empires have been made and unmade after horses. So many wars have been fought, omens, legends, myths, folklore, art, so much of it has revolved around horses. And reading about such things makes your understanding more inclusive and also more nuanced. And in her epilogue, she says this thing that a history of horses can take you to many places. It can take you to histories of great men, but also towards histories of these unknown and unheard groups that you might have never heard of or you might not come to know about. And I think that is something that is very interesting. And so if you are looking for a treat to read, then I would definitely recommend Yashaswini Chandra's The Tale of the Horse.